What's going on, guys? Motivated Jay here, back with Quarantine Correctives, and the topic of today is wrist issues. We're going to talk about how to increase wrist mobility. We're going to talk about how to combat wrist stiffness and combat wrist pain, all using wrist cars and wrist stretches, right? So how do you get wrist issues? Daily life, right? So you can just putting any repetitive stress of any level on your wrist without taking some time to take care of it or put your wrist to its full range of motion will cause this wrist stiffness or eventually wrist pain. Activities include something as simple as keyboard typing, pouring yourself some coffee, working out in the gym, or simply shooting a basketball, right? So I say daily life, I say everyday life because we use our wrists in just about everything we do, okay? Now, what are some limitations that this wrist stiffness will cause? Well, wrist stiffness will eventually lead to wrist pain, and this wrist pain will cause you to probably compensate with other joints around the wrist and then cause pain in these joints throughout your daily life through simple daily activities. These joints include your hand, your elbow, your shoulder, just to name a couple. And so aside from the wrist pain, another limitation it can cause is just limit your progress in the weight room, in the gym, and especially out in the field. It'll limit this because the insufficient mobility that you'll have in your wrist will cause you to not be able to get in certain positions or perform certain movements in the weight room or outside in the field, right? So things, if you think about it, something as simple as a push-up, you need sufficient wrist mobility to do it clean. An Olympic movement that a lot of us use in the weight room, you need some wrist mobility as well, right? So if you think about it, think about when you're shooting a basketball, right? You use your wrist. When you're swinging a tennis racket, when you're swinging a baseball bat, when you're fielding a ground ball, right? When a fighter's grip strength or grip ability, right? When a fighter goes and throws a punch, right? All these things are things that need sufficient wrist mobility, sufficient wrist strength, right? So wrist health, okay? Now, if you're an athlete that's been accustomed to just making up for this lack of mobility by using wrist straps or wrist straps in the weight room, and essentially if you're getting stronger, you're essentially getting stronger with the crutch. You're not fixing the issue. That crutch is still there. You're just getting stronger. You're getting stronger around that same crutch, and then eventually, the stronger you get and you still having that crutch, the higher risk you have for an injury. It's just like building a building with a small foundation, right, or insufficient foundation. You keep building the building, but eventually that building is going to fall or collapse, right? So before we go into how to fix this, I'm going to show you guys the actual functions and movements of the wrist. So I'm going to get into the in anatomical position, basically mainly the upper body. And that just means that my hands are out to the side, my palms are facing forward. All right. So the first movement that we're going to go over is flexion. Flexion just means that I'm moving my palms up towards the ceiling or up towards my head. This is flexion, right? Both hands are in flexion. Now we're going to go extension to the complete opposite. I'm going to move the back of my palms towards the ceiling. So extension is just the complete opposite of flexion. Then we come up here. Then we're going to go ulnar deviation, or what we call adduction, right? Move towards the midline. So I'm going to move my hand towards the midline, or pinkies closer to the midline. That's ulnar deviation. Then we have radial deviation. Thumbs away from the midline, or the hand away from the midline, or abduction, right? So now with that being said, we're gonna go into the stretches. But before I go into that, I want to just let you guys know that there's a lot of different stretches and movements that you can do to activate your wrists. These are a few movements that I found to be most effective, and you get the most bang for your buck. So if you dedicate a couple minutes to this a couple times a week, you should be on the right track. Unless you have a more severe case, then I would add a little more time into it. But essentially, this will prevent you from having to do a variety of different movements and get the same thing or the same effect. So first, we're gonna get into the quadruped position. What we're gonna do is we're gonna stretch our extensors first. So we're gonna go into flexion, right? So flexion being this, right, of the wrist. I'm gonna come down. I'm gonna get in the quadruped position. Now with this, I like this because I can do both sides and I can dictate all the pressure, all the stretch with my own body. And you see what I just did there was move my elbows in. So so the front of my elbows are facing forward. That causes me to get a greater stretch. Now, if I want to get even more of a stretch, I will bring my body towards my fingers, right? The farther I go forward, the less stretch I have, okay? Now, that's for the extensors. Now we're gonna go stretching the flexors, so we go into wrist extension. So again, fingers facing towards me, I'm gonna come up here, and again, I'm gonna try to really turn my elbows so that the inside of the elbow is facing forward. I wanna get a bigger stretch. Lean back, bring my body closer to my fingers versus forward. I get more of a stretch. Now, in these stretches, when I'm doing this stretch, stretching the flexors, I should feel it up front. When I'm doing the opposite, I should feel it on the back side, right? When I'm stretching the extensors, okay? Now, from there, I like to go into radial and ulnar deviation. I like to go into a fist, right? So for this, we're going to a fist, and again, you control this. I like to just come forward and then, again, lean back, right? So you should feel this all towards here. Now the opposite would just be the other way. And I would just come in, and you kind of just have to work a little harder for this one. Straighten out your elbows is a big one. If you don't do that, you may compensate with your elbows and then not feel a stretch. So straighten out your elbows and then come down as much as you can. Okay, this one you probably won't get as much range of motion. That's normal. Now, if these are too tough or if you can't get on the ground, what you can do is just manually do these one by one, right? Flexion, extension, then we can go radial and ulnar deviation, okay? So all these stretches, as always, I would do about 1 to 2 sets of a minimum of 30 seconds each side, okay? We went over what the wrist cars were in a previous video, so if you don't know what they are, you can go back to that video and go and check it out. But essentially, we're just gonna move our joint through its full range of motion to keep it nice and healthy, right? Actively. So some people like to just put something on the top of their forearm so they make sure that they're not twisting at the forearm. I personally like to just grab my wrist so I can feel it twisting, and I can also make sure I isolate on the wrist itself. Now, there's going to be a couple different methods or ways that I'm going to show you guys how to do this. I'll show you guys all three. They're very similar, but at the end, I'll show you guys what the benefit differences of each one. Okay. So first, we're going to start with our palms open, hands extended. We're going to come down. We're going to go into extension, full extension, as much as we can. Again, I'm going to as much as we can. Palms stay open, fingers spread out as much as you can. Then I'm going to go into as much radial deviation as I can. I'm gonna go as much flexion as I can, and then I'm gonna go ulnar deviation, right? And then as much as I can, then I'm gonna come all the way down. So essentially just doing a huge circle. But you see how I'm kind of struggling to come out? Because I'm actively trying to put it through its full range of motion, right? So that's one, right? That's with the palm open. Now I'm gonna do palm closed, right? Same thing. I'm gonna go extension, full extension, radial deviation as much as I can. I'm gonna come all the way up, flex as much as I can, right? Then I'm gonna go ulnar deviation, right? Or adduction. Come all the way down, and I'm back to the starting point, right? That's two. Thumbs closed. Fist closed. Now the third one, I'm gonna put my thumb inside my fist. So very similar to this last one. And I'm gonna go ahead and go same exact movement. Extension, radial deviation. Actually, you know what? Let's take it back a notch. We're gonna go the other way. So thumb inside. We're gonna go extension, ulnar deviation, right? Because we're going the other way now. Coming all the way up for flexion. And then coming all the way around radial deviation, and then extension again to come back to the midpoint, right? So as you can see, I'm shaking a little bit. It's not easy, especially because my wrists aren't the most mobile either. It's not easy if you're not pushing yourself to get to that full range of motion, and you don't start after a couple reps, you don't start to feel that burn in your forearm or the stretches in your forearm. Then you're probably not going through the full range of motion, and you're probably going a little too quick. What you want to look out for, you want to make sure you don't do is you want to make sure you're not going too fast, right? I would go about at least 10 seconds per revolution, right? Per rep. You want to make sure you're going both sides, right? Going this way with radial first or ulnar first. You want to make sure you're going through the full range of motion, right? Not just doing this, small circles. You want to also make sure that you're not moving at the elbow, whether it's turning your forearm or flexing or extending the elbow, right? So now, what's the difference between having your palm open, closed, and your thumb inside? The muscles that we have in here connect through your forearm, through your wrist, through your hand, and all the way into your fingers, some of them. So what that means is when I close my fist, I'm flexing the fingers of my fist, and then when I flex my wrist on top of that, I get a bigger stretch, right? I get a bigger stretch in my extensors, okay? So same thing when I'm doing the full extension. If I'm in full extension and then I go into more extension, then I get more of a stretch in my flexors. So if you notice that when I do this, right? When I do this is gonna be a lot harder than if I close my wrist, I can get farther back, or vice versa. If I open my hand, right, I can come all the way down here, right? So again, all the way down here versus if I close my fist, I can only get like halfway. So I hope that makes sense. And the last one, the thumb in. That's for those of you guys that start to have lateral pain, right, on the outside of the wrist. When I come in the inside for ulnar deviation, I would feel a greater stretch right there. So that's simply the simple reasons as to what the differences are and why you should do all three, especially the people that are having radial pain, lateral pain, or stiffness. Get that last one in. Okay. Now, what's gonna happen if we don't fix this? Things can get serious. Things can get as serious as arthritis, carpal tunnel syndrome, wrist tendonitis, all simply because without the full range of motion or the fluidity of movement, or just the insufficient movement of these joints, the blood flow to these joints and these tissues is going to be insufficient, right? So those tissues essentially start to wither away, which ends up causing things like arthritis, right? Now, as an athlete, being able to perform at all times is huge, right? So don't let something that you can control keep you from playing a game or playing in one of the games that could be crucial in your career. And most of all, don't let it force you from playing at a subpar level. With that being said, don't forget about strengthening the wrist. Wrist strengthening is very important. Now, generally, most athletes don't really have to go out of their way to strengthen the wrist just because of the nature of the sport, in combination with properly holding weights in the weight room without frequent assistance from wrists and straps. You should be fine. But a few exercises that you can add to your routine are rack carries, bottom-up single-arm carries, and then just wrist isolation work, whether it's band or dumbbells. And lastly, it's just very, very, very important. If you have wrist issues, don't use tape. Don't tape your wrists to fix the issues. Now, I'm not saying taping your wrist is wrong. It definitely has its benefits, but don't fix your wrist issue by taping your wrists. That's like putting a Band-Aid on a cut that needs stitches, right? It temporarily stops the bleeding, but the blood eventually gets out, and then you have a higher risk of infection, or in this case, a more serious injury, right? So take care of it the way you need to do it. Take care of it the way you should. And yeah, I hope you guys like it. I hope you guys like the video. That's gonna be it for today. If you like the video, go ahead and like the video. Share with somebody you think this will help. And I appreciate y'all. Have a great day. Stay motivated.